Hello, everyone. Welcome to SaksWorks. It's so wonderful to have you here for one of our leadership talks. I'm so excited to have Hitha Palepu and her fabulous book. It's a whole lot of subtitles. So we're speaking the life lessons of Kamala Harris, how to use your voice, be assertive, and own your story. We're going to hear about how to do all of that today with moderator Deepti Sharma, who is the founder of Food to Eat, and amongst a multitude of other things. Just before we begin, a little bit about SaksWorks. If you haven't been here before, I see some people who have been, and welcome back. We are a new kind of membership club. We are for co-working, we are for wellness, we are for mind-expanding programming, and taking this moment to figure out, Hitha and Deepti, to kick this off and tell us what we can learn from our esteemed VP and her legacy. So please, take it away.
Well, thank you everyone for being here. We're really excited to have everyone here, but I'm excited because I have the opportunity not just to interview Hitha, but also, we were just thinking about like the first time we met, and we met through the wonderful world of the gram, and I was so honored that she shared something that I wrote about, which was deeply personal, and it was about me wearing a bindi every day. And when I think about that, I think about my own multitudes, because if you haven't already, We're Speaking, which is the title of the book by Hitha, which was also something that came from what Kamala Harris said herself. I'm speaking. And I think that's such an important thing to think about. But when we think about multitudes, it's something that I've actually been thinking about for a long time. Like, what makes me me, right? What makes me who I am today, and how do I use that and project that into the world? And for the longest time, as a South Asian American, as a second generation American, I've always had a problem with trying to figure out my identity, my multitudes, and how to live up to each and every single one of them. So I'm so excited to be here with you. I'm so excited to be able to talk about your book, to talk about you and about Kamala Harris and how much she's influenced you and your life journey, your career as a parent, as an investor, as a founder. You have lots of multitudes, right? I can keep going on. As a feminist, as a child of immigrants, there's so many things that we can keep going on about. But I'd like for you to tell me, what was the first feeling you got when it was official that Kamala Harris was going to be the first Black, the first Asian American Vice President of the United States of America?
The smile on my face says it all. It was, and I'm in New York. I live uptown. The news, before the TV notified it, we just heard cheers on the streets, and it was like a celebration happening down our block. So I get shoes on, get my older kid to get on his sneakers, and we go out into the streets, and it is a party. And I happen to be wearing one of my many Kamala Harris sweatshirts. I own many. This was the one that said, "Vote for Auntie."
I have one too. I love it.
And people going, "You must be so excited. I am so excited." And it just was this moment of pure joy and also a deep sense of relief, because 4 years with the previous administration was like a constant feeling of having to check what's happening on Twitter, because that's how we knew what was happening. It wasn't the news media, and that's a big reason why I started 5 Smart Reads, is I need people to cultivate a reading habit and understand what's happening in the world, and that what's trending isn't exactly what is important. But for once, I felt like I could breathe and I could take a break from being news girl for everybody.
I know. I felt the same way. And what's funny is that, so just a little bit about me quickly and some of my multitudes. I'm a 2-time founder, so I call myself a serial entrepreneur. I'm the entrepreneur in residence at Barnard College. I also ran for city council last year. So when I heard the news of Kamala Harris, and when it was official, because we know we had to wait days till it was actually official, I was outside petitioning for myself. And people often say like women have to be asked 8 times before they run for office. I was asked 0 because I was tired of having to wait for my turn. And that's something that I learned from Kamala Harris, which was don't wait for someone else to tell you what to do. Don't, and she says this quote of, what is it? Then I think you'll probably say it better.
It's like I have been told a great many times in my career that it wasn't my time and it wasn't my turn and I would not win. And I have eaten every single one of those no's for breakfast.
Exactly. And that's I think a great piece of advice, right? I eat no for breakfast. And what's powerful about that is that you don't need to wait for someone else to tell you what to do or how to own your own reality. What you need to do is think of your own reality, think of who you are as an individual, and get out there and take ownership of that and take ownership of it in your own way. So with that, what's your most prized lesson that you've learned from Kamala? I mean, there's a lot of them, I know, but what's the one thing that sticks with you? Because she's been an inspiration and a mentor from afar for a long time for you. And we could even start with your why. Why did you write the book? I know you were asked to write the book.
I am the luckiest author alive. With this book and my previous book, I was approached by the publisher to write this very specific book and feeling like I am the right person to also write this book. For me, even though I wrote this book in 2.5 months, which was awful, I do not recommend, I actually been writing it for a very long time for myself. So you mentioned Kamala Harris has been my mentor from afar. I remember the first time I realized who Kamala Harris was. It was back in 2012, and she was doing a press conference that was being aired on CNN. I was in some business trip in some hotel, and that's the only time I let myself watch cable news to catch up on email. And this woman who kind of looks like me starts walking towards a podium, and she opens her mouth, and she sounds how I wish I sounded. And she's informing California homeowners about the settlement she had negotiated with the largest banks for the mortgage foreclosure crisis. And all of a sudden, I was like, that's my person. That's the one. That's who I aspire to be. How do I be like her? I was just starting out as an executive in the pharmaceutical industry. I was always the only woman in the room, always the youngest person in the room, and almost always one of the only people of color in the room. And I didn't have a blueprint of how do I show up in these spaces? How do I own my voice and not be talked over, which still happens quite often. What do I wear? How do I speak? How do I respond in emails? Just these sort of basics. So from that moment on, I kind of went into a near decade-long study of Kamala Harris from when she was Attorney General all the way now to Vice President as sort of a one-woman self-study or a masterclass of how do I show up in spaces that were not built for people like me, to claim my space, to own my power, and to bring more along with me. And this book is kind of the result of that years of studying and trying new things and incorporating advice from other women that have inspired me that I think serve what I admire most about the Vice President.
Yeah, I mean, I hear that, because for me, that was a huge part of me growing up, right? I didn't feel like there were lots of women that looked like me in the spaces that I wanted to be in, right? And an example of that is, I remember when Lily Singh became the first woman to have her own late night show. I was like, holy shit, it's actually possible for a queer woman of color to have her own show? Because growing up, I thought it was just old white men that were allowed to have that, right? And it's so important when we think about representation matters and who we as young humans see in spaces of power. It's what I think about when I think about, who's teaching my kids. I want there to be people of color so that my kids know that authority is not just white men, that it can be brown and black people. And so having a VP in one of the most powerful countries in the world look like me and look like other people of color has been so important and essential. And so when you wrote this book, I was like, this is great, because it is a blueprint that a lot of us didn't have. It is a way, I've been reading this book and I haven't finished it yet, but I can tell for anyone that hasn't, who's listening and tuning in and who's here today with us, that it's a book that you're going to keep going back to. It's a book that's made not just for you to flip through once. It's a book that's whenever you're feeling out of it, whenever you're feeling exhausted and feeling like you need a sense of point of inspiration, it's what you're going to go back to, right? Because there's so many points in here that say, you know, just get up and go for it, right? Or don't let other people's assumptions of you get the best of you, and to make sure that they know who you are. And I think that's something that her mother told her.
Yeah, it was a Shamala-ism, not a Kamala-ism, of you don't let anyone tell you who you are, you tell them who you are. And one of the great privileges in writing this book is I got to learn a lot more about her mother, who was a formidable woman and had so much wisdom. So that's one of my favorite Shamala-isms. The other one is do something about it and don't do it half-assed. So to think about this like petite little like Indian woman like cursing just brings me great joy when I'm having a hard day. And that's sort of the mental thing that keeps me going during the good moments and in the hard moments. You know, the book is structured to be part biography, part my experience if it makes sense, or someone else's experience that I think speaks to that particular Kamala-ism, and then very tactical tips on what you can do to try this out for yourself. It is my frustration with a lot of advice books is that you find one idea that just gets hammered over and over and over again, and I find that very boring. And that's not what I want to read. So in writing this book, it was very intentional that you're going to learn more than you ever thought you knew about the vice president, but you're also going to get some very tactical tips in every page of the book, and not one piece of advice is going to be like the other. It tries to span the gamut, both from a personal and a professional level too.
Which is exactly what I think we all need, especially coming out of what we're going through still, almost it feels like. So Kamala Harris is now VP. We're seeing a lot of these headlines, which are very unfair, slightly or almost very misogynistic. How do you think that affects where she is, how she does her work, and what that looks like for her future? And what kind of a bias do you think that it holds towards women of color versus anybody else?
Well, the beautiful thing is she is unbossed and unbothered by the narrative and the headlines. She does the work, and I think that's something this administration prides themselves on, is doing the work versus tweeting first and then trying to come up with something later, which we all have to deprogram ourselves from the last 4 years to understand this is a different administration and they're going to do things differently. And I think we're all still a little triggered by, you know, the previous one. So there is that. She will continue to do the work, and that's something in writing this book and seeing how she is operating herself is consistent with the Kamala I've gotten to know from afar. That said, I find the press very frustrating in this, in inflaming what I think are probably very typical situations, but also adding a misogynoir to it. That you never heard about Mike Pence being a bad boss. You never heard about your Donald Trump being like a chaotic boss. But again, it was unconventional and mavericky and not, oh, she's problematic. And that is something I hope the media, who is, let's just speak truth to the situation, is largely owned and operated by old white men who are encumbered by the way things have always been, in putting people in boxes and reducing them to narratives that they are unable to see what could be and what is, and therefore report on that. So with that, I think support for the vice president is not going to come from kind of the flattering press or this was the moment she became vice president. We're not going to get that. So it's incumbent on her fans, her supporters, and people who are happy with the direction this administration going. We can't just tap out of politics right now. It is time to tap back in with the midterms coming, with another presidential election where the former guy will most likely be the candidate in 2024, and to fight fire with fire, to fight in a new way, because we can't be complacent, we can't be quiet, and if she's going to be speaking, we all need to be speaking.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the one piece of advice that I always get when I run into folks that like were following our campaign and the work that we were doing is that we hope you don't stop. We hope that you keep going and that you try again and that you don't let this one failure or setback put you back, right? And that you get up on the horse again and keep going. And so what's advice that you would give to people that are watching right now, right? That are watching her, following her, and reading these headlines and feeling a little bothered by them, because it's hard not to be bothered by them, right? Like, what would you say besides don't get lazy? What can they what's actionably like something they can do?
One, don't click on those headlines because that's how they make money. And so the more headlines you click, the more stories like that are going to be written. So in cultivating your own news habit, that is one approach to doing so. Again, I want you to tailor it to what works for you. Some people are happy to be very outspoken on social media. Others are going to be much more quiet and much more private with their views and maybe only feel comfortable talking about it with their family members. I am kind of known as like the Kamala cheerleader in my family. So when headlines like this happen and like end up on the family WhatsApp, I do find myself spending a lot of time like writing lengthy paragraphs of like, this is categorically false, and one disgruntled person does not make for an entire staff. And to just say, consider why this narrative is being purported. It's because it's to try to cripple her at her knees before she's even had an opportunity to, but she has accomplished quite a bit. The infrastructure bill was a big accomplishment. Her trip to Paris was an accomplishment. She is constantly meeting with people to advance policy and advance positions. But because it's not an inflammatory tweet or what we've been used to, it somehow doesn't be viewed as progress. So figure out how you can be a champion and support the causes and the people you admire most. Don't be complacent, don't be lazy. Please vote, but please also participate however you can, whether that's phone banking, whether that's knocking on doors. Is this on? Do I just need to yell?
Yeah.
'Cause I could do that too. Do what makes sense for you, but it's not about what you do once. It's about what you do on a daily basis or on a regular basis. So make civic engagement a practice, not a passive one-time or an occasional activity.
Yeah, I mean, and the other thing that I would say is civic engagement is not just about federal politics, it's about local politics. While our president and our congressional leaders, senators have a huge impact on what happens to us, city council, your mayor, your state assembly, your state senators have an even bigger impact on what we see happening day to day. And I think that's even more important, is that when we think about voting, it's not just about those high level positions, it's about like elections that are coming up on a regular basis locally. So you've written this entire book, but, and I'm sure it was edited down, right? What did you leave out that you wish was in here?
It's not that what was left out, but one thing, if life was different, I really wish I could have met her mother. Like one, I think Shamala auntie and my mom would have been fast friends and been
I could see that.
and then been like ragging on all of us, like, and just sitting in a corner just shooting the shit and having a great time. Honestly, I didn't get to write about her as vice president because when I turned in the book, it had been just a couple weeks into the administration. So she's just getting started. And so I hope I have an opportunity to update this book down the line with more of her accomplishments in this position as vice president and who knows beyond.
And what do you think like her expectations are of us, right? So when she took the seat, one of the things that she said, I may be the first, but I won't be the last. And so with that, I take that as encouragement that I want every single person that's looking out there, drawing inspiration, feeling empowered and driven by seeing me in this position here. Like I'd like to say that she was speaking to every brown and black kid out there and saying that like you belong in all the spaces that you see yourself in, and that you should go out and take the seat at the table or create the seat at the table, whatever it is that you get out there and own your power. But what do you think? Like where do you see that like she's kind of, what's Kamala Auntie's expectation of us?
To keep going And I think the beautiful thing is that we get to define what success looks like for each of us. It is not running for office. It is not being a CEO. It is not starting multiple companies. It is what you decide for yourself. So as long as you are living your values, owning your multitudes, and working in service of the goals you have set because that's what you want, not what someone told you you should want, to me that is what I believe is success, and in not being the last. And then we're all going to get scared about new situations, about new opportunities. That's normal. Figure out how to push through that fear, because we've all felt it. Push through the imposter syndrome, because we all deal with it. Even Vice President Harris, even Michelle Obama, and the way she wrote about it in her book kind of sticks with me of, I have been in many rooms where the so-called smartest people in the world are making big decisions, and what I've realized is they're not that smart. And I want everyone to bring that energy with them in whatever they choose to do next. And when one big goal is realized, to keep going, to figure out what your next big goal is, and to not be confined by what you think you should do, but to do what you want to do.
Was there anything that surprised you during your research when you were, writing the book? I know that you didn't get a chance to interview the family or the VP because of ethical reasons, which you could talk about and touch upon, because I'm sure it might be a thought, and I know you talk about that. But was there anything that surprised you while you were doing your research that you were like, oh wow, like that's interesting, that's not something I expected?
Yes. What surprised me is how many godchildren she has. Like, I lost count after 7. Like, she has more than that. And that she is someone who, despite how busy she has always been, has made time to reconnect with the people in her life. And that is a personal quality I wish to emulate and do a better job of being more present, and just when I'm thinking of a friend or I'm thinking of a loved one, to actually just send the text versus think about sending a text and then something else comes in the way. I'm really in admiration of her marriage with Doug Emhoff, who is a first in his own right. And for as important it is for our girls to see women lead and women step into power, I think it's just as important for our boys to see the strength in being a support. Yeah. And in taking a step back or step alongside. And we both have young sons, and I think both of us talk about how do we raise these boys to understand the power of respect, of support, of you can lead but also know when to listen. And so I fell a little bit in love with Doug Emhoff while I was writing this book as well, and very grateful of my own marriage, and that my husband took a leave of absence from work so I could write this book and focus on work. And he's been the one who handles the grocery buying and school drop-offs and pickups and birthday parties and all of that. And it's given him a greater appreciation of what I've had to handle for the early part of our parenting years. And when we talk about what comes next as he starts a new job and I take a much needed break, it's never going to go back to the way it was, but how do we find something that's our new normal? And I'm very grateful for that. So, and it's not really anything professional of Vice President Harris that surprised me, but that personally speaking, she is who I want to be, aspire to be, and if you're lucky enough to be in her life, it's forever.
That's awesome, right? Yeah, and it's also her owning into all of her multitudes and taking the time and embracing each and every one of them in her own way. And I'm sure that she's also not perfect in all of them, but takes her time and tries to be intentional about how she's involved and gives her time to people and vice versa. And also talking about just role models, it is really important for all of us to think about how our children see us and the way we act, the way our partners see us and vice versa. So that's been really a big part of my parenting journey, is making sure that my little humans understand what it's like to be me, right? And I jokingly said, and I say this a lot now, but like I've always wanted to be a working parent, right? Like, and this pandemic changed that, where I had to be a full-time parent, and I was like, I wasn't ready for this. I wasn't ready to be here 24 hours a day as a parent. I was ready for them to have their own space, go to school, we have some time together, and they saw that, right? They're like, oh, you're going to the office, you're going to go do work, and then all of a sudden they were like, wait, what? She's here all the time. What's happening? Like, I'm confused. Wasn't mommy working? Now you're not working, and now you're out of work, or what? And it's just interesting to see how these conversations in the past few years have changed. And they're only 3 and 5, but people forget, like, kids are listening. Like, little humans that might just be that young are listening to everything, right? And for them, they've seen, like, having a woman as a VP, having a black and brown woman as a VP is normalized. Like, my kids won't flinch the next time they see this happen, because they will see it happen. And I think that's like the most exciting thing about where we're at now. So I'd love to like open it up to some Q&A and see if anybody has some questions for Hitha and her journey as, you know, within her multitudes, because there's a lot that we haven't touched upon, even just yours, which I feel like that's a whole nother conversation, but just what's your journey been like?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so I have a question. So kind of referring back to, you know, you're one of those people that doesn't always feel comfortable speaking out in public, but you have those conversations with friends and family. I mean, how do you not combat, but really have those discussions with family members that don't really agree with, you know, what you're saying, or don't really hear it from the perspective that you're coming from, and what's your kind of best way of handling that and going about that conversation?
Ooh, I've had a lot of practice with this. I think it starts with both parties have to genuinely be willing to listen. And you approach it with, I'm not here to change your mind. I'm here to share my perspective. And back up everything you need, but also, and I hate to say it, there's also comes a point where there are some people you can't just have this conversation with.
Yeah.
They have really bought into, unfortunately, conspiracy theories, and certain new media companies, I find it very hard to call them news outlets, media companies, and the narrative that they have put out there as absolute fact, and not a very manipulated version of the truth. And so for those people, protect your peace. Don't even try, because it has to, both parties have to mutually want to gain an understanding. But for people who just are so convinced they're right and everyone else is wrong, there's no convincing them, so don't even try. Hi.
As someone who sort of obviously has been watching how VP Harris has been treated in the media, is very attuned to how news is packaged and portrayed, I'm curious as to what your thoughts are on how the Biden administration could be better using her, better portraying her, better shaping this narrative of having this trailblazing vice president, and what they could perhaps be doing a little bit better. I think you probably have thoughts on that, is my guess.
I have many thoughts. You know, I think they're doing a traditional media playbook of playing defense and responding after the fact and not getting ahead of the story. And so you saw Jen Psaki tweet in support of the vice president. You saw Ron Klain on CNN in a conversation with Anderson Cooper talking about her office is right next to mine, and I work with her all the time, and I adore her, and she's been incredible, and I've worked with a lot of administrations, and I can tell you she's been one of the best, fast on her feet, fast vice presidents who's adjusted to the job I've ever seen. Now, that is all, that worked in the 90s. That might have even worked in the early 2000s. That does not work in 2020, where everyone's got their version of the truth, and you really have to go on offense. So if I were the Biden administration, I would use some of the people in the administration who are not afraid to go on Fox and preemptively talk about, do events with Vice President Harris, which I expect we'll see with the rollout of the infrastructure bill. She'll be doing more things with Secretary Buttigieg, with Secretary Granholm. And these are people from the administration that are the Fox News friendlies that go on and do interviews on that network. I also think Fox News needs to start covering the administration the way they covered the previous one, which is, the infrastructure bill wasn't even aired on Fox News, the signing, whereas it was aired in every other media outlet. We also have to realize that some media companies are now just so hell-bent on their agenda versus the public service of informing the public, that whether it's doubling down on our effective media partners, whether that's influencers, whether it's podcast hosts, whether it's new media outlets, I think they've done a really great job in focusing their efforts with interviews with the vice president and president, with local media outlets, but that's not as visible. It might be hearing the people they need it the most, but let's be honest, most of the country think the economy is in the tanker when in fact it's never been stronger for a really long time, and by the end of 2022, it's projected to be stronger and for the first time in 50 years than it ever had been. Supply chain issues are because people are also spending because the recovery bills gave them more money. Like, we need to reframe these things that are being manipulated as downsides as actually because of what this administration did. These are successes that you can thank Joe Biden, thank you Brandon, and thank Vice President Harris for. So I do think they're working from an older playbook, and the little things they've done with influencers and whatnot are not nearly enough, because think about who wins elections. It's voter turnout. So I would be tapping Stacey Abrams and saying, what should we do? And put her in charge of this. And then I also think the last thing is the Democrats have a big tent party. We are obviously, the moderates are sometimes at odds with the progressives, and that is harder to manage. So I would put in some efforts and staff up on how can we collectively work together and get big things done.
Agreed. Any other questions? Go ahead.
Yes.
What do you think the likelihood is that we'll see a President Kamala Harris? I know it's really, trying to predict the political future of this country is obviously not easy to do, but she should be the Democratic frontrunner based on where she is right now. Heartbeat away from the presidency, et cetera. What pregame it? What do you think the likelihood is, or what do you see for that?
Okay. If what I think will happen, or what I hope will happen, and this is what I'm trying to manifest right now, I think, and the media would have to really reframe its reporting of her in order to support this, but right now it's what are we going to do to be able to get, the Democrats a shot at holding on to the House. I think they have a much better job at the Senate, but the House is really precarious, and for the Democrats to keep the White House in 2024. And I think it's, if I were to pontificate, this is what I predict. Whatever scraps we get in the Build Back Better plan, we have to just take and get it passed. So it should be 12 weeks of paid leave. If we get 4, it will be a huge win, but not a big enough win. Get what you can get in this bill and use it as a foundation to keep building upon. We too often treat these bills as one and dones, and that's not how good policy is made. So start with there. Next year, focus reconciliation on drug prices. And rather than saying Medicare, I wish the Democrats would get away from this, but instead of saying let Medicare negotiate with drug companies to set price, do what we did with the pandemic, and it's have the government be the biggest purchaser of pharmaceutical products that are priced for shareholder benefit, not patient benefit. So that's insulin. That's all 5 insulins. Those are EpiPens. It's Remicade. It's a lot of these commonly used drugs that are priced because they can be price tagged. And if the government is the biggest purchaser of it, that's a much more effective way of negotiating price than saying this government agency gets to set price. And I think you could get some Republican support on a bill like that too, because it's going through the free market, but drastically reduce drug costs for a lot of people in this country. And then I think if you manage to hold on to the House and the Senate, in 2023 comes a comprehensive child care or paid leave bill through reconciliation. So making enhancements on early child care and elder care, investments that were made as part of what will be in the Build Back Better bill, offer scale-up paid leave to that 12 weeks you needed by figuring out how to pay for it and getting it passed with new Democratic senators and hopefully a Democratic majority in the House. And I think if you do all three of those things, and she's in charge of 1 to 2 of those things and out front leading on that, there's your path to for Vice President Harris to eventually become a President Harris. However, the media narrative and the media reporting has to change. We have to stop building up women, especially women of color and especially Black women, just to tear them down. It is a pattern we have seen over and over and over again. And until we stop giving those inflammatory articles the clicks, those TV segments the views, and stop denying the revenue associated with them, nothing is going to change on that end and from a business end. And then media appetite has to change too. So speak up however you feel comfortable speaking up.
And when are you running?
Never. But I will take an appointment in Health and Human Services to stare down drug companies.
For those of you that know, she is a pharmaceutical CEO.
Yeah.
So that's where the drug conversation comes in. Cool. Well, thank you everyone for being here, and thank you, Hitha, for putting this book out and your energy into it, and thank you to your partner for allowing this book to come out in the time frame that it was able to, and to your kids for being so patient and listening to whoever was watching them at the time.
I mean, Netflix?
Yeah, and Netflix.
Thank you to Netflix for educating my children while I wrote this book.
Yeah. So we have copies here, and Hitha will be signing.
Yes,
Yes?
I'm just coming back in to say that we have copies for sale at a subsidized price at the front desk. A gift from SaksWorks, and as well as lunch. Lunch is here. Please eat, chat, and talk about how to change the future, at the very least change the future of drug prices, because that is a plan. I very much like that. Thank you both for coming here. Wonderful to have you at SaksWorks, and hope to see everybody again really soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.